In hot environments, suffocating temperatures and the sun's burning rays must be endured. And sometimes there are also toxic substances present, like sulfur or mercury. All the same, some creatures flourish here, thanks to astonishing adaptations which particularly interest scientists. We're going to follow their trail to the hottest and least hospitable places on our planet. It's hard to imagine that 10,500 years ago, a vast savanna stretched out here. The Sahara is the largest and most arid desert in the world. Only the Tuareg and a few brave souls dare to roam here. Régis Belville is one of a very few European camel drivers. A real expert on the desert, he is the guide for Christian Peters, a CNRS researcher and ant specialist. They are looking for the queen of the desert, the silver ant. To find the ants, they must go to a part of the Sahara that gets less than 15 millimeters of water a year.
On dromedary journeys, it's absolutely vital that dehydration is managed. That's because you're making considerable efforts in that heat for 8 or 9 hours march every day, which means you're constantly at your limits, because there's a constant risk that your internal temperature will rise significantly, and that will have a drastic effect on your hydration.
In hot environments, creatures are subject to harsh conditions. During the day, the dromedary is capable of raising its body temperature to 42 degrees to sweat as little as possible. But the silver ant can raise its internal temperature to 54 degrees. This is the absolute record for any creature on Earth.
So do you often find silver ants during your desert crossings?
Oh yes, quite regularly, in all the big sandy regions, even in a hyper-arid part of the Sahara, a place where there's absolutely no vegetation. And while the ants are still there, they can still survive in an environment where there's nothing left, no other insects.
The silver ant is the only insect capable of crossing the burning sand during the hottest hours of the day. Christian and Régis want to discover its secrets.
Look, there's a nest. And yes, that's the right kind. That's the silver ant, Cataglyphis bombacina. And you see, it's silver because its abdomen is covered with very dense hairs, which reflect the sun's rays.
Its tightly packed hairs have another function. They trap a thin layer of air, thus creating an insulated space which reduces perspiration and thereby the loss of water. But that isn't enough to explain the astonishing resistance of this insect.
And another thing is that they have very long legs, and so that keeps the sand away from them when they walk on the burning surface.
Like this, their abdomens are 4 millimeters above the ground. Just like that, at that height, the temperature has already dropped by 7 degrees. Their legs finish with pincers that act like spikes on the sand. With this kind of footwear, the ants are capable of traveling at over a meter per second. At At that speed, the air current generated beneath their abdomen prevents them from being fried on the spot. Less well equipped against the heat, its direct predators, like lizards, can't stand ground temperatures above 70 degrees. So the way is clear for the ants to collect the bodies of insects fried by the sun and to have a fine barbecue. But how can they know where they are in a landscape of such similar dunes and then find the minuscule entrance to their nest?
This work is bringing a body back to the nest. A lot of other ants use chemical trails to find their directions relative to their nests. But here, in this environment, chemical markers don't work because the sand is always moving and it isn't a good surface for the molecules. So this ant has to be able to tell where it is visually. So how does it do it? We might have thought that it used tufts of grass as landmarks, but there is no such thing. There are no tufts of grass. And researchers have found that the ant is capable of reading the angle of the sun and can locate itself relative to that angle.
Certain facets of their eyes allow them to perceive lines of light in the sky which are invisible to the human eye. So they can determine their position by the angle which their body forms with these lines.
So this little worker has brought back the cricket's leg from the other side of the dune without following a chemical trail. It has managed to find the little entrance hole to the nest uniquely by visual orientation. Not bad, eh?
Navigating by sight in the desert implies a very specific form of organization for the colony as a whole. These ants are carrying young workers. And the carriers are all running in the same direction. So what is this strange ride for?
So I followed several workers who all led us to the nest. It's 21 meters away from the first one, and these two nests both belong to the same colony and have a single queen. With this species, there's no chemical trail on the sand, and the old workers have to transport the young workers to the new nest so that they can work there.
This surprising transport operation gives visual references to the young workers, so they know how to find the different nests and can then fully take part in the colony's life.
When you walk in the desert here, you only see a very small part of the colony. Most of the colony is buried beneath the earth, away from the heat. And most people don't realize that they only see a tiny part of the ant society.
After having tamed the sun, the silver ant has found how to use the sand to help it survive. Digging down, the ants find an agreeable temperature of 25 degrees. Christian wants to understand how these ants manage to fashion their nest in a material as unstable as sand.
It seems, Christian, that the nest is under this clump of camel grass. It's a typical grass here which we call spot.
In a period of extreme drought, with no rainfall, these roots would keep the structure intact.
Of course, that would be because of the desert winds.
Even though the roots form the roof structure of the nest, the silver ant needs special skills to dig and form the sand.
The capacity to manipulate sand is really essential to the silver ant, because it has to dig subterranean chambers. To do this, the ants take balls of damp sand from the inside to the outside, and they have very long mouth parts, which allows them to hold onto the ball of sand, which they dispose of outside.
As well, their long mandibles are covered with adhesive hairs that allows them to hold on to the balls of sand.
They also have to maintain the nest entrance because this entrance blocks up with sand. And so the ants have a unique behavioral adaptation, which is to use their forelegs to push the sand away.
The silver ants are completely adapted to these desert conditions. Their survival depends on the sun and the sand dunes. But the effect of heat can lead to ground becoming as hard as rock. The silver ant could not live in this stony desert. Death Valley is the second hottest place on Earth. This desert region of Southern California is protected by a mountain range that is over 4,000 meters high. When air reaches the other side of these mountains, it has lost all its humidity. The temperature of the air can rise to 57 degrees and be over 93 degrees on the ground. Don Sada is one of the rare scientists to venture into this furnace. "2,000 years ago, this valley was covered by a salt lake. The lake has totally vanished today, leaving behind a thick salt crust. In such an arid and desolate place, where might life take refuge?
Here we are at Badwater, and there's a snail that lives right next to the springs here at Badwater. It survives only under the salt crust here. And it's found only associated with the salt here on the floor of Death Valley.
Salt is usually particularly noxious for snails, but in this case, it's a species which is perfectly adapted to this micro-ecosystem. This snail feeds on an algae which only grows here, under this salt crust. To survive in such a corrosive environment, its organism secretes a viscous liquid which protects it from salt burns. But why are all these snails massed here?
In the summer, and the soil can get as hot as 100 degrees centigrade. It never gets warmer than about 55 centigrade underneath this salt crust. They only occur along this one eastern edge of Badwater, not on the western side, only where the water is freshest, coming off the mountains behind us, through the ground, coming to the surface, and providing fresh water that these snails can be associated with.
Contrary to what one might think, springs are many and varied in Death Valley. They have become the ultimate refuge of the pupfish. Once, these fish swam in a gigantic lake. A little over 10,000 years ago, the lake retreated and the surviving pupfish found themselves isolated in springs where the temperature and the salinity vary considerably. Don Sada is en route towards one of the least hospitable springs in Death Valley, in which live the most resistant variety of pupfish in the world.
Their ancestors survived and lived in estuaries where there are wide ranges in daily change in dissolved oxygen concentrations and temperatures and very difficult conditions. So their ancestors were able to survive in those conditions, and when they arrived here in Death Valley a million years or so ago, they had the pre-adaptation to survive these harsh conditions. Now they've evolved additional abilities to survive even harsher conditions than you find in estuaries, and that's why they've been able to stay and live and persist in Death Valley.
This variety of pupfish can stand water temperatures that vary from 4 degrees in winter to 45 degrees in summer. To be able to stand such a range of temperatures, the cells of their organism fabricate a thermic shock protein.
This is a very harsh environment for pupfish. The salinity is more than twice that of the oceans. Water temperature is about 40 degrees centigrade, and dissolved oxygen is less than 1 part per million. This is a harsh environment even for pupfish. Very few species of fish can occupy this type of habitat.
And when the water level drops, their living conditions can become even more precarious.
Oh, look at this. Small pools, isolated, it's full of fish. They've been concentrated here as the water's evaporated and disappeared upstream and downstream. I've never seen this before. There must be thousands of fish in here. They will be dead within several days.
So as not to get trapped, the pupfish have to climb the thin stream of water to the spring. Many will perish during this race against the clock. But the survivors will repopulate the spring the next year, thanks to their capacity to reproduce rapidly and in great numbers.
It's a humbling experience to watch life flourish under such harshness to me. And the desert is hot and dry, but it's about the water in the desert. It's all about water. If we don't have water, we don't have life. We don't have anything but rocks. We don't have the sculptured mountains without water. Water structures everything in the desert.
Thousands of years ago, it was hot water springs linked to volcanic activity that sculpted these limestone rocks known as travertines. In another American state, at the heart of Yellowstone National Park, you can watch the birth of this limestone formation as it happens. Over 200 geysers and 10,000 hot springs are to be found here. In some of them, the temperature can reach 100 degrees. Yellowstone Park is actually a gigantic volcano which has collapsed upon itself. Yellowstone offers one of the richest and best protected ecosystems in the United States. But lava continues to build up 10 kilometers below ground. When water from rivers and streams enters the ground through infiltration, it heats up and springs from the ground in the form of geysers. This water isn't just boiling, but also highly toxic because it is charged with sulfur and mercury when it comes up through the rocks. Microbiologist Gil Geisey is interested in zygogonium. This algae has an enormous concentration of mercury, which is highly toxic. However, the algae is at the bottom of an astonishing food chain.
So here we have a algal mat, and the water here is very acidic. It's around a pH of 2, which is about the same acidity as vinegar. So I have to put on these knee pads in order to protect my clothing. You can see I forgot one day and it ate up my fabric. The zygogonium mats are filamentous green algae that harbor a diverse microbial community, including single-cell chlorella-type algae, as well as bacteria. And those bacteria concentrate mercury from the water into the algal mat.
This environment at the limits of life is, however, the cradle of the soldier fly larvae.
The adult fly initially lays its egg in the zygogonium mat, and they provide protection for those eggs from predators. It also provides a source of food.
Feeding directly on the zygogonium, the fly larvae ingest mercury as well. Usually, toxic substances such as mercury are transmitted all along the food chain, and their levels increase from link to link.
Oh, look at this. This is a predatory insect that feeds on the soldier fly larvae. And we would anticipate that the concentrations of mercury would be higher in this species than the soldier fly larvae.
With such a concentration of mercury, all the animals dependent on the zygogonium should be poisoned and die rapidly. But against all expectations, the level of mercury found in the predator's body is really tiny. The fly larvae, who are the first link in this chain, seem to have found a defense against this poison.
Oh, here's a large one. This is approximately 3.5 centimeters in length. It's about a day or two away from emerging as an adult.
What kind of adaptation has allowed them to make the mercury harmless?
This is the gut of the soldier fly larvae. This is where we suspect are bacteria that detoxify the mercury that they ingest during their normal feeding activities on the algae. We suspect that these bacteria are similar to those that exist out in the environment that remove mercury from a toxic form to a less toxic form. And it's possible that they took up those microorganisms and adapted to the environment in their gut and helped remove mercury so that it would not accumulate at high a concentration in their tissues.
The fly larvae have been able to make use of the microorganisms found in the toxic waters of Yellowstone.
Yellowstone Park is going through changes as we speak. New hot springs are being formed, new chemistry is taking place in the water, and the microorganisms that find themselves there have to adapt to those changes or they perish.
Above a certain temperature, only bacteria are capable of resisting. It is these bacteria which lead to an astonishing range of colors. These colors are therefore indicators of the presence of thermophile microorganisms. That is to say, microorganisms which only live between 45 and 70 degrees.
I wonder what we got here, John. pH 3.05, temperature 72 degrees. We guessed right.
Biologists Tim McDermott and John Varley study these microorganisms.
So we wouldn't want to tumble in there.
No, but these thermophilic bacteria would. In fact, they live here all the time and they love it here. It's home sweet home. So in a place like Yellowstone, people can actually see the microbes, okay? Oftentimes you think, well, microbes are so small, you have to have a microscope to see them. But in this case, there are so many of them, they form these thick mats.
To understand just how many bacteria are present in one of these mats, let's take a side trip inside our mouths and have a look at dental plaque. Our dental plaque is made up of thousands of bacteria which join together to form masses. On another scale entirely, there are millions, even billions of bacteria forming these bacterial mats in Yellowstone.
A lot of times people, visitors of the park, they walk by here, my guess is they see these colors and they think it's rocks. Yeah. Don't realize it's living bacteria. Yeah. Let's see. Nice thick mats here, several centimeters thick. These particular mats take a long time to grow back. So if a hailstorm comes along and punches holes in these mats, such as we have here, it will take several weeks to months for this to grow back together again and reseal itself. That's in contrast to some other hot spring mats that grow back in a day or two. They regenerate very, very rapidly.
This regeneration is in fact the result of a complex mechanism. To form a microbe mat, bacteria attach themselves to a surface. Then they sprout molecular fibers which allow them to form a mass together. Then the bacteria reproduce and multiply until they form a compact and fairly thick mass.
Gotta be 4 or 5 centimeters, easy. Look at the colors. It goes from the dark brown on top, it goes to grades to green, and then we got this nice, beautiful pink red down at the very bottom. These organisms assemble themselves based on either tolerance, preference of light, sunlight. These different colors correspond to different pigments that will capture different wavelengths of light. And so that's why you see the different colors as you work your way down through the profile. This yellow-orange pigment might actually be protecting the cells from UV, for example. They prefer to be under highlight conditions as opposed to the green layer here that is found at the bottom.
The more light there is, the stronger are the colors in the pigments, a little like our skin, which darkens under the sun. These microbe mats are a delicacy for the Yellowstone flies. They assure the flies of protection from their predators. Well, from most of them. In its search for food, the wolf spider doesn't hesitate to brave the boiling waters. But only the most robust will survive that experience. Because of the altitude, many of the hot springs of Yellowstone have a boiling point which can reach 100 degrees. Despite the surrounding heat, some plants manage to grow around these springs.
Around almost every hot spring, you'll find grasses of varying types growing up against the hot water. The high temperature water cools off very rapidly, such that these plants can grow in these environments. But there are some plants that are very, very interesting. One known as, its scientific name is Dicanthelium, but its more generic name is hot springs panic grass. It looks like weeds in my front yard, but it's this grass right there with the purple edges to the grass leaves. This particular plant has a fungus growing associated with its roots. And researchers at Montana State University have shown that this fungus relationship with this plant is what allows this plant to grow at these higher temperatures and tolerate high temperatures. The mechanism is not yet known, right? But somehow this fungus is imparting some protective measure or causing the plant to react some way that allows it to protect itself from these higher temperatures.
Only the most resistant plants have managed to adapt to such inhospitable conditions. The water temperature is just as tough for microorganisms. The green color of this spring comes from the organisms which live there. They have chlorophyll, a pigment which captures light energy. Above 72 degrees, photosynthesis becomes impossible. In the second spring, visible on the right, the temperature gets up to 80 degrees. The water is red and contains another type of microorganism. Differences in temperature represent real physical frontiers for microscopic life forms. The surprising colors of the edges of these springs are in fact the result of an astonishing biological mechanism, chemosynthesis.
So the difference between photosynthesis and chemosynthesis is all in the energy source. We know trees, plants, grass, etc., they use the sun as a source of energy, solar energy. Whereas bacteria that are involved in chemosynthesis use minerals as a source of energy. Arsenic, iron, sulfur, hydrogen sulfide, hydrogen. These are all very, very high energy sources for bacteria that they use on a very regular basis. And Yellowstone is an awesome place to find these kinds of bacteria practicing this kind of metabolism.
It's even possible to determine the chemical composition of hot springs just by looking at their color, which signals the presence or the absence of certain minerals.
Okay, John, we're going to sample here to look at the sulfide concentrations associated with this particular spring. We think what's going on here is that the sulfide is associated with sulfide oxidizing bacteria that forms the elemental sulfur, the yellow color. And so the sulfide corresponds to certain kinds of bacteria. And then we're going to sample over here where there's no yellow color, which I expect won't have any sulfide. We'll see if I'm right. I was right. The blue color indicates we have a lot of sulfide in this particular spring, and the clear color means, or the no color, means there's no sulfide. Now, the reason that's important is because in some cases, some microbes eat sulfide as an energy source. They actually eat it. We call it eating at the Hard Rock Cafe. As opposed to some microbes are poisoned by sulfide. So it's a question of who can use what. Sometimes it's a poison, sometimes it's food. That's the case, that's the way it works in the microbial world.
Some bacteria manage still to find energy in the most unexpected part of the park, in the depths of Lake Yellowstone. To observe these bacteria, the scientists use a radio-controlled robot equipped with a camera and a multitude of captors. And they discover a fascinating spectacle which they scarcely expected. Under the water, the gas emissions become visible. Thousands of bubbles spring from the Earth's entrails. The hot water springs continue to flow, even at the very deepest part of the lake. And they too are the start point for a food chain. Thousands of microorganisms turn in a circle around these springs. But what are they? What are they feeding upon? In order to know more, John and Tim take samples of the microorganisms with the help of a net.
I can see copepods and diaphnids in here. They're both crustaceans, they're both cousins to lobsters and crabs, but they're very minute. And they form a very important part of the food chain.
Daphnia and copepod are microscopic crustaceans. They filter water and live mainly on plankton. In Lake Yellowstone, they have another source of nutrition.
But they're attracted to these hydrothermal vents that form a long column from the floor of the lake to the surface. And that column is just filled with bacteria that are enriched by the hydrothermal vent. And so the copepods and diaphnids form a ring around this and take advantage of that very, very rich food resource that the hydrovent is giving them.
From that, the Daphnia and copepod become in their turn an important food source for the many fish in the lake, and especially for salmon. Thanks to its hot springs, Lake Yellowstone is in fact an oasis of life.
The vents that are scattered underneath the west thumb of Yellowstone Lake here are hot springs vents. We call them hydrothermal vents when they're submerged like that. And they're very much like the deep sea smokers that occur in a number of places in the sea.
It is in fact beneath the sea that the hottest springs on the planet are to be found. Their temperature can reach 400 degrees. These hydrothermal springs are formed on the mid-ocean ridges where the continental plates are moving apart. At a depth of many thousands of meters, seawater infiltrates into the faults and heats rapidly against the magma. They spring forth in deep-sea smokers, hydrothermal vents. We're going on the Atalanta, a research ship of the Extremophiles which is on a mission to study hydrothermal springs. This ship is a real floating laboratory. Aboard the ship, microbiologist Marianne Cambon-Bonavita is getting ready to make a descent down into the abyss.
And here all along the way, there are a whole lot of little surface features that could be chimneys.
She takes her place aboard the Nautilus, a miniature submarine capable of diving to a depth of 6,000 meters. The Nautilus and her team dives deeper and deeper into the permanent night of the great depths. The descent will take almost 2 hours. To find their way in this darkness, abyssal life produces its own light. At 4,000 meters depth, the darkness is total. And without light, no photosynthesis. It is therefore the minerals which are the starting point for an ecosystem whose richness never stops surprising researchers.
So in fact, there's a large biomass around the hydrothermal springs. They were even called the oases of life when they were discovered in 1977. Because in fact, there's a whole specialized food chain based on chemosynthesis. Chemosynthesis involves the chemistry of hydrothermal springs, which is volcanic and emits composites like hydrogen, methane, and hydrogen sulfate, and which the microorganisms then use to make organic material, which in turn is used as food by living creatures, and a whole fauna develops around these springs in a concentric manner.
Some of these microorganisms can only live at temperatures higher than 80 degrees. Scientists have even observed microorganisms capable of reproducing at 113 degrees. In such conditions, bacteria give up their place to more evolved organisms, the archaea.
So these are very evolved organisms, which have adaptations around their membranes, which is fluid only at high temperatures. If you put them at 60 degrees, it's as if they were deep frozen. All their cellular machinery, their proteins, their enzymes are adapted to high temperature. They have different creases, and their DNA is highly protected so as to remain stable at high temperature. These really are evolved organisms and perfectly adapted to these conditions.
Some hydrothermal springs expel hydrogen sulfate, a deadly element for most creatures. However, these worms seem perfectly at ease in this hostile environment. Their red gills bathe in warm fluids. They extract the hydrogen sulfate. Their digestive system is replaced by a kind of pouch that contains microorganisms. These transform the hydrogen sulfate into organic matter, which the worm feeds upon. Everything lives in perfect symbiosis. Thanks to the articulated arm of Nautilus, the team has been able to take several specimens, which are taken to the laboratory.
I think that it's the same shrimp you find everywhere. There are different stages, young, adults.
Shrimp are the creatures the most frequently seen around hydrothermal springs. One of these, recognizable because of its bloated head, has especially attracted the scientists' attention.
The Rimicarsis hydrothermal shrimp has in its head a system of symbiosis with several types of bacteria, which are capable of using either methane, hydrogen sulfate, or iron to produce organic material. The shrimp also has a lot of microorganisms in its digestive system, which also probably furnish the shrimp with organic material. And in exchange, the shrimp lives permanently in a mixture of seawater and the fluids so as to feed the bacteria it has.
Scientists have just begun to understand how life is organized around hydrothermal springs.
On each new expedition, we found new species beside the hydrothermal springs, simply because these are habitats which are separate from each other. Between two hydrothermal springs, there are many, even hundreds of kilometers, and so life is adapted to each hydrothermal spring. There are a whole lot of new species discovered each year around these extreme environments.
Did life on Earth first appear beside hydrothermal springs? This hypothesis is still being debated within the scientific community. But the discovery of organisms adapted to very hot water and using minerals as a source of energy has completely overturned our knowledge of the world of life. To the point where nowadays some scientists theorize that life could develop even on the most inhospitable planets. Extremophile heat creatures not only push back the limits of life, but the limits of our knowledge.